Welcome, everyone. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. The International Parking and Mobility Institute is pleased to present this program titled Take a Ride with Leadership. My name is Justin, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you need assistance anytime, please use the raise your hand feature or type in the chat feature, and we will assist you. Today's presentation will last 60 minutes and include a specific question and answer period. However, you can queue up a question for us at any time during today's presentation. To enter a question through the webinar system, simply click on the Q&A tab and type your question and press enter. These instructions will be repeated later in the program. We will make an archived version of this presentation available in a few days and post it onto IPMI's YouTube channel. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Tiffany Smith is the Director of Parking Authority of River City in Louisville, Kentucky. She has worked for PARC for 25 years. She leads a diverse staff of 32 employees with a focus on employee engagement and a commitment to superior customer service. With her today is Mike Tudor, CAPP. He is the Assistant Director of the Parking Authority of River City in Louisville, Kentucky, where he's worked since 1997 within key off-street and on-street operational management and leadership roles. Tiffany and Mike, welcome to the program. The audience is all yours.
Thank you, Justin. And thanks everyone for attending today. Mike and I are super excited about you guys taking time out of your busy schedules to take a ride with Mike and myself on Lead to Leadership. And this ride today will include race relations, inclusion, diversity, and equity. But we don't want to ride alone. We don't mind having backseat drivers today. We're asking that you will take a quick moment to be able to log into live surveys and interact with us as we actually take this ride today. Mike and I have been working together for over 20 years. This is longer than my first marriage. I did want to announce to everyone that I am now Tiffany Peebles. So you may see Tiffany Peebles come across, you may see Tiffany Smith, but Mike has been my work husband for many years. And as husband and wives typically do, we usually don't agree on everything. We go back and forth. But at the end, we always agree to respect one another.
Yeah, that's right. We do respect one another. And I will say I've been on many rides with Tiffany physically in her car. And those have been very interesting and exciting rides. Hopefully today it will be less eventful, but just as memorable as we take a ride with leadership. And, as you mentioned, we're going to take a look really at 3 key points today. So we're going to be looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And but before we get started, we want to go ahead and make sure that you're logged into the poll everywhere. Just like Tiffany said, go to 22333 and text Michael Tudor 474, because we're going to go ahead and throw up our first survey question here right off the bat. And we want to know your input as to whether we need to have a different question up there. The question should be, should we align ourselves or stand up for a particular mantra, such as Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, or All Lives Matter? And so we'll let Gerald kind of work on getting that question up there for you. But in the meantime, we want to talk about the Black Lives Matter mantra. And this is something that has been around as of late that, Tiffany and I, we've had a lot of discussion about this. And I'll tell you from my standpoint, when I first started hearing Black Lives Matter, I kind of had some issues with it because I also thought, well, if Black Lives Matter, what about everyone else with All Lives Matter? Or what about Blue Lives Matter? And I can see where there's some conflict here that you and I, we really had to sit down and talk through some of this to come to an understanding. So Tiffany, why don't you share some of your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter mantra?
Sure. Well, obviously I have a Black life, and Black lives do matter to me. And it is certainly not by any means not saying that all lives don't matter. To say that all lives matter, you should easily buy into Black Lives Matter because Black lives are part of all lives. And certainly Blue Lives Matter. I have my first cousin, which is like a big brother to me. We grew up together many times in the same household. And my uncle is also a police officer. And as a result, I've always had a very positive impression and relationship with all officers. But I would like to draw emphasis on Black lives, and I believe that it's important to stress and emphasize why at this moment in time in our country and all over the nation that there's a large degree of emphasis on Black lives. Here lately, we've been seeing more abuse of Black lives on social media and on national television. And as a result of that, we are needing as a country, for humanity, to put more emphasis on Black Lives Matter. We know in history that Black lives were not always valued the same as other lives. And it's possible for some to continue to have implicit bias that is built in, or years or generational misconception of what a Black life should mean to everyone. And I just think that the more we can have conversation and dialogue and help people to understand that the statement Black Lives Matter is not meant to be controversial. It's not meant to get people upset. And I do want to put out there that it's only fair to say that when I speak of Black Lives Matter, I'm saying the statement, the movement. I don't know anything about the organization. I don't have any direct affiliation with Black Lives Matter Incorporated, and I can't speak affirmative or negative about it. When I speak of Black Lives Matter, I'm speaking of my life, in particular my son's life, my husband's life, those that are close to me, my family. And that's when I want to have these type of conversations, Mike, to just really drive home and stress that it's not intended to be offensive when people are marching, peaceful protests all up and down the street, Black and whites, people of all ethnicities, trying to emphasize and drive home that Black lives matter. And the carelessness of the lives being taken either by police officers or citizens in general must cease.
Yeah, that's kind of a good point to make. And we talked about this quite a bit. There is the organization Black Lives Matter. And when I looked into it, because I want to understand kind of where we come at when, are we identifying all lives matter, blue lives matter, Black lives matter? I want to know what I'm standing up for. And, so in the Black Lives Matter organization, there can be a lot of controversy as far as, if someone says, well, Black Lives Matter, and they automatically go to what the organization stands for, that people may all of a sudden kind of shut down and not want to talk about it. And that's where you and I we're able to talk back and forth about things and work through things. And I have to, agree with you that, of course, all lives matter. And there is a time and a place where certain minority groups, you have to be able to stand up and support minority groups. As you know, from our relationship, I'm a Christian. And one of the biggest things that came through to me that really kind of changed my mind on this was a minister friend of mine. And he had posted something out there about, when Jesus walked the earth, there were certain lives that he's paid special attention to. There were the children, there were widows, there were women. And he basically said, those lives matter. And I got thinking about it, and during that day and age, he was saying that now's the time to focus in and say these lives matter. And throughout history, there's different time periods where we need to really think about those groups that need help. And right now, I would agree with you that Black lives matter, and they do need assistance. And so that's kind of been my change in things as I've worked through it and kind of thought about these mantras that we threw out there, do Black lives matter? Do all lives matter? Do blue lives matter? And yes, to all of them, but, what are we going to stand for? And, Stephen Covey once wrote, if you remember, we did a study on this with our staff, the 7 habits of highly effective people. And habit number 5 in there was seek first to understand and then be understood. And that's kind of where you and I came at with things on this, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's really where there's a need to have those conversations and understand that, well, there are, in any group, there are some anomalies, there are some one-offs, and people are they want to start something, whatever that may be, whatever that looks like. But the majority of people just are wanting others, everyone to understand and agree that Black lives do matter. And that shouldn't be offensive. And when you are passionate about something, that's not always intended to be hostile. And I think sometimes when people are seeing others' passion behind Black Lives Matter, they're taking it as hostility. And I'll speak on behalf of anyone that thinks and believes the way I do. I don't want hostility with anyone. I just want me and mine and my life to be as much valued as yours, Mike, because the reality of it is. And sometimes I think it's valued even more. But that's just between me and you.
So let's go ahead. We had that survey question we threw up at the beginning. Let's
I'm interested.
Results, if we can, for that survey question.
Wow.
So it looks like, most, the majority of people say that, there is, we should be able to stand up for a certain particular mantra, such as Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, or All Lives Matter. Yeah. I think I told you recently, I just got Disney Plus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. And I didn't get to go to the theaters to see this, but they have Hamilton on there, and which again was great. I know you got to go see it in person. I know, but one of the things I really like is, Hamilton's in there, and one of the things he says is, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. And you see that all through it, where he has what he's standing up for, and you see other people that they're kind of on the fence about things, and they just sway from side to side. And so I think it is really important that we find something that we are going to stand for,
and we take I like that. I like that we take a stance, because sometimes people's silence is translated to you taking a stand, and I think that has to be kept in mind. And everyone is not as vocal as you are, Mike.
As you.
But honestly, everyone is not as vocal as me. And I understand that some people are not comfortable having these conversations and taking a stand. But it appears that at least half of our crowd today believes that you should take a stand. And I think the biggest stand about the Black Lives Matter movement, not the organization, is that it's just value the lives that we represent on a daily basis, right? And when we're talking about Hamilton, which I absolutely adored, this gentleman is just brilliant. I don't think anyone can deny that. But one of the things he also talked about in there, his friend would always say, Hamilton, speak less, listen more, which reminds me of.
I know, it's a video you like, right?
Yeah. How important it is to listen, to have active listening. And we were really excited about presenting this video to the audience today, but it didn't go over well. Technology, right? But one of the things about this little kid, he's simply adorable, and he's having a conversation with his mom, and his mom is not understanding him, or at least to the degree of which he desired to be understood. And he keeps talking back, very respectful, but hilarious. Gerald has put the link out there. But he keeps telling her, listen, Linda, listen to me. And the reality of it is sometimes we are offended because we're not listening. We're not trying to hear what people are saying. We've already formulated our opinion, and we're going to talk a little bit about that more through our ride today.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great video. I agree with you. I could watch it numerous times and already have. But so let's go ahead and move on to our first point we really want to get to today, which is diversity. And so diversity, and we're talking about in the workplace, this refers to an organization that intentionally employs a workforce comprised of people of varying gender, religion, race, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, education, and other attributes. But for our purposes today, since we've been talking about race relations, that's the R in R.I.D.E, we really want to focus on race.
Right. And again, we'd be very narrow-minded and condescending, if you will, if we didn't address the fact that race relations does not begin and end with Blacks. We know that it's a much broader a group of individuals that have been discriminated against for one way or the other. And sometimes that's even classism. But for today, we are going to have the majority of our focus Blacks and some of the race relations that we like to see to take place in our industry, because I'm excited about the fact that our industry is taking that courageous move to address some of these concerns. If we can go ahead and pull up our second survey question, it says, do you feel that you work in a company that supports diversity? And then you have many options. We have A, always, most of the time, sometimes, rarely, and never. And one of the things that we talked about in our definition was intentionality. And I really like that word around diversity, that in today's climate, it is important to be intentional about how you practice diversity, in particular in the workplace.
Yeah, and so if you're going to go ahead and vote on this survey, just go ahead and feel free to go ahead and text Michael Tudor 474 to the number there, and that'll allow you to vote in on it. And we're going to pull this down in just a minute. But like you said, Tiffany, in the workplace, you know, we've been part of a workforce that really has quite a diverse employment. And you can see a picture here. This is from 2019, last year, that we took it. And of course, there's a great leader right there in front.
Your servant leader, Mike, your servant leader.
I don't know how much of the servant is being served, but anyway, you can see here we have really, when you look at it, it's almost a 50-50 split between in diversity between the Black male and female and the white male and female that we have working for us. And it's always been that way here, which I think is awesome. And it's something that I don't know that you see in every environment, but we've really enjoyed having that work experience here at the Parking Authority. I do remember, you know, back when I felt like when they were really talking about diversity a lot several years ago, and I'll be honest here, it's somewhat embarrassing, but you know, at one point I know I made the comment that the white man is the most discriminated against person. And it was a feeling, you know, I'll admit it, because I felt like that the odds were starting to be stacked up against me. And so I felt as if I were to go into, let's say, a job interview and look for a job that all of a sudden I had to bring something extra. I couldn't just be myself, but I had to bring more to the job interview to be able to, you know, if they were looking at trying to have some diversity in the workforce, if there was someone else that fit the diversity that they needed, that all of a sudden I was down. I didn't have what I needed to get the job. And that was a bad feeling, to be honest.
I would agree with you. And I do commend you and thank you for your candidness and honesty, because that's probably not an easy thing to admit in an open crowd, that you as a white man felt like you were the most discriminated person. But the reality of it is that's your feeling. And that was what was going through your mind. And when you were having to approach opportunities, we know that it wasn't in a job interview. We know you know better than that. So not in a job interview, but just in particular, as you were going through, feeling that now, because of the emphasis on diversity and wanting to create an environment of diversity within a workplace or maybe on a board. I know on our particular park board, we have to focus on diversity as a metro agency. We have to have a diverse board. And it's almost like a paradigm change, if you will. But what you're feeling, Mike, and what others may be feeling with there being so much emphasis on Black Lives Matter and on diversity and inclusion and equity, is that now you're feeling as if you're being discriminated against. And the intention is to create some form of a balance from groups of individuals that have not just a feeling of being discriminated against, but an intentionality to be discriminated against, right? And now the intentionality is to reverse that pendulum and create some balance in organizations across the world. So I understand, and what you're expressing, what you sound like is like a little vulnerability there.
Yeah, it was, but you know, it's not bad to have those feelings, because then it really allowed me to be in someone else's shoes, to put myself in their place and understand it. You know, one of the things I really like, so they just started this week a new season of The Voice. And have you ever seen the
Yes.
Voice? And so one thing I love about it is all they're doing is they're listening for their talent that they have. And, you know, their backs are turned to the person who's singing. And I think one of the first nights that they showed it, there was a person that was singing opera, and the voice was just hitting these notes that were unbelievable. It was a beautiful voice. And when they turned around and they finally showed us who it was this black male that was hitting these notes, and he just had a great voice, and they were shocked because they thought it was coming from a woman. And, you know, we really need to be able to stand up on our own skills that we have. And that's something that I pulled out of this and realized, again, talking with people and working my way through it, that, you know, we really need to rely on the skill levels that a person has that they bring to a position, and make sure that everyone has that opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But with each of these sections, we do have a takeaway word that we want to present to those who are listening. And for this one, as you mentioned earlier, it's vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And so vulnerability is being able to expose ourselves to our true capabilities, so our true skills, what we can actually do, and not the privilege that we receive based on our race or gender. And so, you know, we kind of put this definition together. You and I, we talked about this, and privilege is one of those things that, you know, some people have a hard time talking about because they don't understand the privilege that they have. My daughter, if you remember, she goes to U of L.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And she's an education major, and she brought home this challenge that they had done. It was called a privilege challenge. And you and I think it was last year, we decided to do this privilege challenge with our staff. And here's a picture of our staff on a rooftop. And so this is the end of the challenge. But in the beginning, we're all lined up shoulder to shoulder. And throughout the challenge, I'm announcing out different things that they have to either take a step forward, they don't move at all, or they take a step backwards. And so some of those things could be as simple as if you grew up in a single parent home, take a step backwards. If you grew up and your parents gave you your first car, take a step forward. If your parents paid for your college education, take a step forward. If you ever had to change your appearance so that you wouldn't be made fun of, take a step backwards. And so we went through, oh goodness, maybe 30, 40 of these questions, and probably more. But you see the separation that began to take place in our staff, and see those that may not have realized some of the things that made it easier for them to get to where they wanted to in life because of the privilege that they were given.
Right. And I think that's important here, that if you're looking at the picture today, it's not just all white individuals in the front and black individuals in the back. I also found myself further in the front because of opportunities that had been afforded to me. But one of the basic questions that were asked, did you grow up in a single parent household? While I had the good fortune of having a 2-parent household, father was a firefighter, mother was a nurse, couldn't get much more American than that. When my children grow up and they take the privilege walk, they would have to say that they did not grow up in a 2-family household, but they'd be able to see how some people, and because of the observations gleaned from this experiment, you were able to see where some privilege was granted to you, black and white. And I'm not offended by the fact that I've had many privileges, whether that was my parents paying for college or my grandparents giving me my first car. That was just a fortune that was afforded to me that I, quite frankly, didn't do anything to deserve or have any rationale why I was blessed enough to come up in a family that way. But what I try to get my children to understand is acknowledge the fact that because you've had some privilege, it's afforded you more opportunities and allowed you to be a little further down the spectrum than others. And I think that's what we are trying to exhibit with this privilege walk. And it did take some vulnerability on both ends. Mike, I remember I was having a conversation and I was like, I think some people were a little embarrassed because they were kind of further back in the experiment, back in the line. And at the time you shared with me, well, the opposite was also true. There were people that were feeling a little embarrassed because they were further up in the line, and maybe they hadn't realized how much of an advantage that had created for them. And again, nothing to be upset about or offended or embarrassed one way or the other. It's just showing the reality of it and everybody being vulnerable.
Yeah, and just so those who are watching with us today, there is a link, and you can go see a YouTube video of a privilege walk, and it's really interesting just to see some of the questions that are asked and how it starts separating. You know, they start out as very, you know, kind of joyful, and everyone's kind of getting along, and then they start separating out, and they start feeling the separation that they have of those who had privilege and those who didn't. And some of the comments that they have at the end of it are worth listening to today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm grateful and very fortunate to work where I work and have the people that work with me that I do, because this was something that Mike had observed. I had seen the privilege walk before, but didn't think to bring it to our staff, and Mike wanted to bring it to our staff, and it just opens a lot of eyes, which is good and which is what's necessary while we're taking this ride with leadership and riding our industry and riding life, opening yourself up and understanding that not everyone is in a position that they're in because of their own fault. Some people just ended up there because of where they were born, quite frankly.
Yeah,
hey,
so Tiffany,
it's a survey question.
I was going to say, let's pull those
What kind
up.
of results we had from it? Wow, this is encouraging. And I do see where 8 people say rarely. This also goes back to, we're going to be talking about perspective at some point through our ride. But Mike, I was sharing a story with you not too long ago, within this same time frame, maybe within a month, that I have a best friend and she works for a pharmaceutical company, and they were on a webinar having a conversation about do they have diversity in their company, and one of her white female counterparts spoke up and said, oh, absolutely, yes, we have diversity here, and I've seen the growth in our company, and I'm encouraged by what's going on. I'm proud to be a part, and we're doing a great job in the area of diversity. And my best friend, who happens to be African American, also same position, and she spoke up and she said, well, no, I disagree. I don't see a large degree of diversity here. Do I see some diverse opportunities? Do I see some diversity? Yes. But in terms of supporting diversity, I see a great number of people in what she called to be mid-level management that have the talent to do more, but have not been presented with the opportunity. And I think if we start talking about the amount of African Americans, Blacks, that feel as if they have talent to do more, but there hasn't been an opportunity created for them to be able to show themselves. And I'll talk a little bit about an experience I had with diversity and equity as we move on. Mike, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's very important. The only one thing that, you know, we need to open up the communication, and that would help people when they have different perspectives on things to be able to understand exactly what's taking place in a company. And I'm encouraged too by the results here that, you know, always or most of the time. So we've got 92% of the people that feel like there's diversity is taking place in their company.
And Mike, you almost got it right when I said, Mike, do you have anything to add? And if you had just let me have the last word, I would have had an opportunity to commend you, but as usual, you had to insert something more, even though, yeah, it's okay. It's just how you are. Okay, let's go to the next definition, equity. Equity, simply put, is fairness or justice in the way people are treated. That seems like a very overly simplified term, but the reality is equity is really just this simple. I wanted to go ahead and have Gerald, if you will. Thank you, Gerald, for being our Vanna today. If Gerald can go ahead and pull up the next survey question. And it just talks about, have you ever felt like you were being treated unfairly or unjustly? And I'm going to give an example and share a little vulnerability with myself first, and we'll move on. When I've been in this position as a director for 5 years, and when I was considered for the position, I had 20 years of experience in parking, and not just in parking, at park. And I had already finished my bachelor's in accounting from UK and gone back to get my MBA. And I was actually a year into a second master's when I was being considered for the position. At this point, I had the exact amount of experience that our previous director had, and I had the education, which was more than she had at the time. And when I was being considered for the position, I was told, well, Tiffany, we'll try you out in this position. We'll put you on a probationary period. Okay. And we're going to start you off less than what she's making. And after 6 months and you've proven yourself, then we will permanently put you in the position. And if you've proven yourself, then we'll give you the additional money that that the current director was making. Now, I don't think you have to be a rocket science to know that this was far from equity, but I'm always up for a good challenge. I'm very competitive, and I thought, well, absolutely, let's go, because I had no doubt in my mind that I would be able to succeed their expectations of me. But was this fair? Was this justice? No, it lacked equity.
Yeah, I remember that, and you handled it very well, professionally and personally. You know, I'll give you your kudos there. You know what, though, I remember, so many years ago, the city had a big push on equity, and they made us go through equity training, and all the employees had to. And if you remember, they had this slide that they pulled up, and I think in a recent webinar, you kind of used a similar one. And so I came back from that, and I'll be honest, you and I talked about this. I didn't like this slide at all. It really bothered me. And partly because I think I'm the gentleman in the jeans that can just stand there and see over the fence. I've always been able to see over things. I'm pretty tall. But what really bothered me was these boxes that they were putting underneath of people and picking them up. And I know that sounds horrible, but to me, the boxes represented government programs that I see as people abusing. You know, and so whether that's welfare or food stamps or whatever it is that is out there, I see people that take those things and you know, they sell their food stamps to get the lottery tickets, or they stay on welfare so that they don't have to work. And I know that's not everyone, right? That's a very small percentage. But in my mind, that's what I saw when I saw these boxes and this fence there. And to me, it just didn't seem right. It seemed like something was missing out of all of that. So, I mean, Tiffany, what are your thoughts? Obviously, you have thoughts on this picture. What are your thoughts about it?
Right. I did use this picture recently. And on that last box that allowed the individual to be able to see the game more clearly, there was a ramp for an individual that was in a wheelchair. And this box or this ramp allowed this individual to be able to see the game. And that didn't appear to be nearly as offensive to some. But for this particular picture, it created a box that annoyed you because your mind immediately went to welfare or the Section 8 or maybe even the food stamps that some people have to rely on. And I understand the need for that. That doesn't annoy me. It doesn't bother me. Now, what bothers me is the abuse behind it. I don't have a problem when people take advantage of the system, because in my mind, I understand that it's a result of systemic racism or classism that has gone on for decades that have put a certain group of people, individuals, in a position to need a box. That quite frankly, if the boxes weren't there, they wouldn't be able to eat, or they wouldn't have nice homes or decent homes to be able to live in. And from that perspective, I can't be annoyed by the box, because as I spoke earlier, I've been fortunate enough to have a large degree of privilege that put me in a position to be able to take care of myself and not be hungry on any days or not have a place to lay my head. And I would want that for everyone. And if that meant that they needed a box in order to be able to afford, and when I say afford, I don't mean monetary, but to be able to enjoy some of the same luxuries that I have, then by golly, give them a box. Now, I think it's important that we note that while I'm okay with them taking advantage of the government system, I'm not okay with them abusing the government system, whoever that is. I'm not okay with anyone abusing systems that have been placed in been placed intended to help someone and they take advantage of them. I just think that's wrong. But you had another diagram that when you added this third diagram, you seemed to be okay with it.
Yeah, I was looking for a good slide that really represented how I felt about it. And I hate that there's barriers in place. And I think that's the biggest problem with it. And when I saw this one on justice, I was like, oh, that's it. That's exactly what is needed. Justice is needed. And justice is basically when you can get rid of the systemic barrier that is there. And so everyone can see through. No one needs boxes then. No one needs the extra programs to be able to lift them up and give them the boost that they need. And I understand the problems with this, because justice is something that from the very beginning, from the beginning of time, people have been fighting for justice. And so will we ever get there? I don't know. But to go to the root cause of what the problem is, and to be able to fight it there and be able to get the fence down or change the fence so that it's not a barrier to all, is ultimately what I see is the fix to things.
Right. And I could agree with you up until if it was just the barrier that needed to be removed so people could see the game, then okay, yeah, just remove the barrier. But keep in mind, there have been, you and I talked about Louisville, and I love Louisville. Let me put that out there. I love my great city, Louisville. But Louisville has had some not so many good ways about it. And that's another reason why there's so much unrest here in our city over the Breonna Taylor murder, homicide, whatever you want to call it. This young lady is dead. She's no longer with us. So whatever you feel about it, whatever mantra you take, my point is, this is why some of this unrest has taken place in Louisville, because Louisville is one of the most segregated cities in the world. And there has been knowledge that where the government has admitted that they created red line. They created, and I know this took place in other cities, just speaking about Louisville, because this is the one I know of, but there were red lines that were created to keep, in particular, African Americans in certain pockets and groups of town. And that then there wasn't economic development for those groups of towns. So that made it difficult for them to have opportunities or have good food or access to fruits and vegetables, which led to health issues. And it goes on and on. And these boxes are intended to help get them back the leverage that they lost. There was a whole lot of hurt going on, and not enough help. So now the boxes are the help to try to even that out, to create some equity, to give some justice. So even if you tell me, okay, I'll remove the barrier, Tiffany, now these individuals can move in these neighborhoods, they can get these loans. Well, they don't have the jobs for them because of the barriers that were created that held them down for so long, that even now, if they're in a position to apply for the house, they can't. Yeah. And one of the things that I think about the abuse of something that's very big in our industry, and I know I talked about it a lot with some of our colleagues in other cities, and that's the abuse of the handicapped placards. I don't think any of us have a problem with a handicapped placard that would allow someone more time because of a disability that was outside of their control, but they're living with on a daily basis, or a more premium spot so that they can get in and out and do what they need to do. It's because they are at a disadvantage and they need some assistance. And that's why I'm okay with the boxes. And I know, Mike, you're thinking about those big loans that you have out there for your children.
I've never, as a middle-class American, I've never been able to take advantage of the boxes, and that's okay. I can work through it. I've got 2 kids that are in college. We don't qualify for any type of help to put them through college, so we have to take out loans for them. I had to put myself through college and pay for it, and just those things haven't been available to me. And so there's some things that need to probably be worked on with them, but I do understand. I definitely, and especially here in Louisville, I get where people need help in certain areas to be able to get them up and out of what they're dealing with. And so I really have no problem with that, but we need to keep moving on.
Well, hold on a minute. Did you hear me tuning up my violin for your wine and cheese?
I don't hear your violin. It's very quiet.
I will say though, let me add just one more thing before we move on. I know you were speaking of the college, the not being able to apply for those grants or whatever because of you being middle class. And I'm not able to do that either. But I also want to point out that, but when I do apply for the parent loans to help my children gain their college education, I'm able to do that because of the advantages that I do have. We have to keep in mind that some people apply for those parent loans and it's obvious that they could not pay them back, so they don't get them. So if they don't have that box, they never can get out of the first illustration that we have up there. Okay, I'm done. I need to say that. I'm having the last word this time, Mark.
That's fine. So, hey, our takeaway word for this section, just so that everyone has it, is perspective. And perspective is basically being able to see someone else's point of view as valuable as your own. And so sometimes it's really hard to do that. Sometimes it's really hard to step back and listen to someone else's point of view and to see that they have some valuable points that they're making and not just be stuck on your own point of view with things. And that's kind of what we were talking about back and forth here with Tiffany explaining her point of view on equity, as well as me trying to explain my point of view of the equity side of things. So let's go ahead also and take a look at our survey results for the.
Yeah, I'm real interested
here. That's
See,
good. Well, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking
it goes back to just driving home the point that most people can relate to them not being treated fairly. And then 18% said no, and boy, that's a blessing. That's a blessing that they haven't been able to, that they can't relate to that. There's some certain things that I don't want to be able to relate to. So that's a good thing. We'll go on to our next one. Thanks, guys. I can't thank you guys enough for being these backseat drivers today and participating in these surveys. Our next one is about inclusion. And thanks, Gerald. And so this is the achievement of a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully and have equal access to opportunities and resources and can contribute fully to the organization's success. So as we pull up this last and final survey question, I want you to think about, does when you answer this question in terms of inclusion, does it fall in line with that definition that we just shared? Mike, you were.
I remember there's a quote that we used. It's Verna Myers said that I think equity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And it makes me think about a recent party I was invited to, a wedding party that you may be very familiar with. That, you know, I got to go to the party, but I really didn't get asked to dance.
That's probably because I knew how you danced, and I was trying to save you, and more importantly, your wife some embarrassment. So I let you stay in the chair over there. But you know, I've heard, I know this quote from Mrs. Myers, and the one I heard was that diversity is being asked to the party, and equity is being asked to dance, but inclusion is being asked for your playlist. And I thought about this. I was like, oh gosh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So diversity. Hey, Tiffany, can you come to my party? Yeah, great. And I go to the party and I'm just sitting over there along the lines. But, you know, somebody can check a box that there was some diversity at the party. Then I think about being asked to dance. Hey, Tiffany, you want to dance? Oh, yes. Here it is. I get to come out here and I'm dancing with everybody else. And I'm dancing, but I'm thinking, what in the Sam Hill is this music? I'm not feeling it, right? And then inclusion would be, now they just played a song from my playlist and I am feeling like I am part of this party because now I'm being understood, I'm being included in this music.
You know,
go ahead. I know you got something smart.
You know that even if I was asked to dance at your party, Beyonce is not my playlist.
You know what? But that was my party.
I didn't hear anything.
No, all jokes aside, you're right. And we have to keep that in consideration, that inclusion is not always going to be reasonable. but in the workplace, it should be. While we try to make this analogy to being invited to a party, which I think is very good to help people understand, it's still the reality of it is in the workplace, there needs to be that intentionality about including everyone.
Yeah,
I know we had
right?
I can't hear you.
Yeah, we had a really good example of this recently with our meter staff.
Yes. We had a meter attendant, and this particular meter attendant was being asked to bag some meters, and it was around the same time as a lot of the protest was going on. And the individual was an African-American, young African-American. He happened to know a number of people that were out there protesting, and he just felt some kind of way about bagging the meters, but it was his job to do. And he asked, can I just go bag the meters? But our police department at the time had advised that they wanted to supervise. They wanted to be there to help protect the individual. And he didn't want that protection because he didn't like the optics of it. And the supervisor had heard what the meter attendant was asking and also heard what LMPD was recommending to do. And he went with LMPD versus the meter attendant. And this just did not, this didn't lead to the meter attendant feeling that he was being heard. There was a lack of inclusion there. Even though the supervisor had his best interest at heart, it didn't go over well.
Yeah, I remember you calling me about this, and you were upset as well as the meter attendant being upset, and so I talked to our supervisors about it and everything. And the most important thing here was that for him to feel like he was being heard, and he didn't feel that at all. So you're right. He knew some people in the area. They just wanted to go in and bag it like they normally would. And if anyone asked them what was going on, they would just say they were doing their job. But when the police were there and there was already some issues back and forth between the protesters and the police department, it would just heighten the intensity of things. And it did. And we had some confrontation that took place when they were out. So in talking to our supervisors and just a good learning experience,
absolutely
about, hey, not always will you agree with what the other employees say, but you need to let them feel like they're being heard and listened to so that they know that they're included in on the decisions that are being made that directly affect them.
Yeah, it reminds me of the lady we have here that works the front desk, and we intentionally labeled that position the director of first impressions because that's what she does. She gives the first impressions to anyone that comes in our office. It's important. And she had a recommendation on our monthly application. And Lord knows we've been using the same monthly application for over a decade. And in my mind, I'm thinking it's fine. But she made a point, and it wasn't going to make things go negative or positive. It was going to be empowering to her because she was the one that was dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. What I love about that example we just gave was the amount of dialogue and conversations, even though they were uncomfortable, that took place afterwards with the meter attendants, with the supervisor, with Mike, myself, that help us to understand different perspectives that people were dealing with and why they were doing things and why they wanted to do things the way that they had requested.
Yeah, and speaking of inclusion, I know one of the big things that we worked on last year with our staff was we were going through a remodel, and you decided you wanted this big, grand, I mean, look at this, velvet seats, and this isn't ours, but this big...
trying to get us in trouble, trying to get me in trouble.
I just got to move up somehow. This conference room that everyone could have a seat at the table. And prior to us being able to expand and get the space we needed, there's maybe room for maybe 20 people or so. And then everyone else had to stand around the edge or sit around the edge of the room. And that's not what you wanted. You wanted everyone to be included.
Not at all. And the thing that really made me feel some kind of way is it was always the same people. A lot of times the meter attendants, because they're not located in our same office. We're on the 4th floor. They're on the ground level where their shop is. And I think that sometimes they feel a little marginalized, right? They don't feel included. They feel kind of like the stepchildren. And anytime we would have a group activity at Park, they would always be on the perimeters, and it would drive me crazy. They'd get their plates and just either stand and eat or sit down, and they never felt as if they were accepted or had a place at the table. And kudos to Gerald, who was part of our team, because he would do just the opposite. Knew he had a seat at the table, but he would intentionally take the sides and make room for other people to sit down. When we remodeled, we created an environment, a table where everyone gets a seat at the table. If you choose not to speak, that's okay. But you are sitting at the table and you get the same privileges as everyone in the room.
Yeah, and there's a reason we chose this picture, right, Tiffany? I mean, this is the Vanderbilt.
Yeah, these are the Vanderbilts. This is, I would spend some time there for my honeymoon, actually, and went to the Biltmore Estates. And this was important to him. So the seats that are on the perimeter there, they can add more leaves to the table and seat as many as 64, because he wanted everyone to feel included. And think about how long ago that was. He understood the value of inclusion for his guests, people that were within his organization who were coming to his house. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about our ride today with leadership, that you're making everyone in our industry feel included. And I know our ride is coming to our end and there's still so much to be said, but it's exciting to me that our industry is taking this serious. And I really want to see us lead the nation, because we have an international industry. I want to see us lead the nation in how we can make some changes around race relations and diversity and equity and inclusion. And in order for us to do that, that brings us full circle. We must be willing to listen. And listening, our definition is being able to accurately receive and interpret information without putting our feelings or thought ahead of someone else's. And Mike, I know you and I were talking about this whole accurately receive and interpret information. Why don't you unpack that real quick?
Yeah, it's really easy to say you're listening to someone, but you're really not. I mean, you've already got your thoughts and ideas formulated as they're talking. And so you're not taking in their information so that you can receive it properly and interpret what they're saying properly. You're too busy already coming up with your response that you want to speak back to them. And, that's really not good. I mean, so many times we see people interrupt other people. Tiffany, you've never interrupted me. I know. But interrupt people. And I've seen you many times, where you want to interrupt and you'll write something down just so that you can remember it. But we want to make sure that we're not doing that we're sitting there, we're actively listening to them, and that we're not putting our feelings or thoughts ahead of what theirs are, because theirs are just as important as what ours are. And,
absolutely. And the whole point of our ride today was to show people that some of these topics are really uncomfortable, uneasy, and that they don't have to be confrontational. They need to be had. People need to be talking. We also need to be listening. And I heard this quote that just really drove home to me. It said, it's more important to talk about an issue, whatever the issue may be, without settling it, right or wrong, than settling it without talking about it. And we're just asking that people have the courage to open up and have some of these hard conversations and see how we can make some positive momentum, some positive change in our industry around race relations and equity and diversity and inclusion. And I believe we can do that. One of the things we haven't had an opportunity today is pay a lot of attention to what might be going on in the chat room. So we want to do that before we end.
Before we get to that, I'm going to interrupt.
The survey question.
Yeah, let's take a look
and
at
he's good for something, guys. He's good for something.
So it says, do you feel as if leadership at your company or organization includes you in on key decisions that you can influence? So the majority say most of the time, which is good. Those that are rarely, it can be really frustrating when you're not included in on those decisions. And you can really.
But it is good that no one said never.
That is true.
We didn't see any never. I know we had, and we were a hot topic either last year or the year before with Park, and there was a lot of interest in Park, and people wanted to come in and purchase Park, and I'm like, go away. But when the conversations that were taking place with the administration and with Metro Council, sometimes we weren't always involved, even though we had 200 plus years of experience in parking and at park. And there were other experts that were brought in, parking experts that were brought in and consulted on if this was a good opportunity, if this made sense to sell park off. And I remember feeling a certain kind of way as one, the leader of park, and then one had been here for 25 years and not feeling included. And it wasn't a good feeling. And it's one that I vow to never have my staff feel. And if they do, hopefully they feel as if they could come to me and say something so that we could make a better environment for us to work in. So Mike, I can't see the chat because my eyes are not that good.
So we do have one question that came through. It says, could the team readdress perspective further? And so if you remember perspective, we had our definition was being able to see someone else's point of view as valuable as our own. And, you know, to me, that's being able to, it kind of includes all of these things that we've been talking about today, listening definitely, but being able to listen to someone, understanding what they have to say, and knowing that what they're saying is just as valuable as what I have to say. And it's all based on their perspective. So when Tiffany, your perspective is going to be completely different than mine. Your life experiences, right? You growing up in, you know, a two-parent household and with the number of siblings you had and the schools you went to and the friends you had is very different from the neighborhood and family unit that I grew up in to where I got to. So perspective shapes your decisions and how you see things now.
And your opinion.
And your opinions.
How you value things.
And it doesn't mean that yours isn't any more valuable than mine or mine is more valuable than yours.
No. I remember I play a lot of tennis, and we were having a conversation one day after a match, and one of the ladies that was there, she was Jewish, and I didn't even know it, but we got to talking about Black Lives Matter, and I was explaining to her about how I'm more towards just the meaning, and she was telling me some reasons why it was offensive to her, and it was good to hear her perspective because I didn't come from that school of thought, but it wasn't a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. It was just hearing her perspective and respecting what she was saying and understanding why she felt that way. And I just don't think we as a nation or as a planet do enough of that.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with you. You know, we're about out of time. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I do appreciate everyone being able to join us today. And along with this Ride with Leadership, we're going to have more conversations like this. We're going to look and see about trying to go to some regional associations and trying just to have these conversations. Not that they're always easy, not that they're always right. We'll try to be a little bit vulnerable in them. And you'll see some sides of us that maybe you don't agree with, but hopefully you understand we're just trying to talk and work our way through things and understand different people's sides of race relations and how it's going. Yeah, that's it. Hopefully we didn't lose anyone along the ride either, that they didn't just fall out of the car.
Didn't take a sharp curve and they got thrown out.
I do know one time, just to tell a story, Tiffany, there was a person trying to get in the car and she was taking off and they barely had their foot in the car. So it does happen. We lose people from time to time when Tiffany's driving. So hopefully today that didn't happen.
I'm aggressive, but I'm not dangerous. Don't y'all believe him. Don't let that be y'all's last impression of me.
So Justin, do we have anything else?
No, we just had some great comments in the chat here. Great perspectives. Thank you for a great conversation, and thank you for being taking the time out of your day to talk to us a little bit more about the ride that you took us on. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will need to conclude our program for today. Special thank you to Tiffany and Mike for being with us today.
And Gerald.
And Gerald. We look forward to having you join us for IPMI's next Shop Talk, the financial picture, building your 2020 budget and beyond despite disruption and revenue shortfalls. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes today's presentation. This production has been copyrighted in 2020 by the International Parking and Mobility Institute with all rights reserved.